We're giving people time to get into the Zoom. Um, just give us a couple of seconds. We're having mild technical difficulties, but we've overcome them, and we're going to get started in just a minute or two. Okay, let's kick off. As we know, there are a lot of calls on Argentina's election last night that are working their way through the system from competing brokers and other political pundits out there. Um, we're delighted to have Catalina Buitrago, who many of you know has been working closely with us on the preparation for these elections. Catalina works as the chief of staff for Joaquin de la Torre, and they've been invaluable in helping us anticipate some of the positive, outcomes that have happened, particularly in the province of Buenos Aires. We also have with us Javier Romero, who's a longtime pro operative. He also was the director of the area of institutional affairs at the Fundación Pensar think tank, and he also was a director and the secretary of Public Works. And we hope to, pull on some of his insight on how it looks from within the pro and the whole process of post-election coalition building, which is a key focus for many investors. And clearly President Milei set the tone last night in his post-election speech and a very long interview that he gave with Luis Majul of LAN Plus afterwards. We're not going to spend too much time going over the numbers from the election. I think that everybody has these at their disposal. As we can punctuate some of the headline figures that the LLA plus the pro we believe is around 104 deputies. The FP is now at 99, and as you may have seen, um, the LLA added 13 senators and now has 28 compared to the 28 that the Kirchneristas still hold in the Senate chamber. So, as we expected, under the Duhon congressional election system where you vote by lists. Clearly, the polarization strategy that the Malay political team pursued worked to their favor quite significantly, you know, and I think one of the biggest, headline results from the evening is what happened in PBA is that Diego Santilli's incorporation as the head of the candidate list in the deputies helped them flip the largest province and the bastion of the Kirchneristas. They recovered, just over 14 points, and Santilli came out victorious, which is something that nobody expected. We did some Zooms late last week with Catalina and Joaquin, and they meekishly said, we're embarrassed to say this, but we think that the LLA could win in PBA. So kudos to them for that election. So the main topics that we want to hit on this call, because everybody now has the numbers in the books, is where do we go from here, and effectively, what are some of the key signposts that we should be looking at? As everybody knows, now if you have a Bloomberg terminal or other access to market prices, is the bonds on the long end of the curve are up around 21, 22%, and the bonds on the short end have pierced the magical level of 10%. But I think one of the key focuses is how does the Malay administration capitalize on this new count of deputies that they have? They've gotten to within spitting distance of what the 129 deputies that many people, look at as sort of a simple majority to pass reforms. Again, that is if all of the congressmen are seated. And also, I think for the first time, and something we weren't expecting, is that, with 20 senators, they can then chip away at the sort of grip that the Kirchneristas and the Peronists have had on the Senate, literally, since democracy came back into vogue here in Argentina. Um, the other, interesting thing, the read through is that in Malay's, speech after the election, while he was conciliatory and he spent a lot of time congratulating his team, is that we took that as a message that yes, I have a team. These are some of the key members. He was particularly, praiseworthy of, Patricia Bullrich, of Toto Caputo, Santiago Balasili. In addition, I think that he clearly now sees Diego Santilli as potentially the LLA's pathway to win the gubernatorial election in 2027, which is an important input, because if they have a pathway and they have a candidate who has charisma, who has some Peronism on his CV and so forth, is that is one of the most important, I'd say, outcomes from the election last night, is that now they have a presumptive gubernatorial candidate for PBA. It's possible that Patricia Bullrich then is, either potentially a vice presidential candidate or could be the presumptive candidate for Caba. So the lineup that they, now have as we look out to 26, 27 is much, broader and deeper, with some of these people in the skill positions. Now, one of the other things that we need to be aware of is that we don't know what the future of Kirchnerism is within the whole Peronist traditional party bloc. Is that I think, as we get along here, I'm going to ask Catalina for some of her views on this, because obviously Peronism, their backyard, the source of their power, is in the province of Buenos Aires. And we what came into evidence in the numbers that came out, particularly in Section 1 and Section 3 last night, is that Joaquin de la Torre's prediction that the intendentes, or the barons of Conebrano, that they were not going to play with the same, ferocity that they played on September 7th, is a clear read through that there are deep fissures, within the Peronist Party, and particularly within Kirchnerism. And it's not clear to anybody. Many people look at the election last night as though Axel Kicillof comes out as a loser, and that his sort of presidential project for 27. Remember that he cannot run for re-election in the province of Buenos Aires. So that is another important thing to watch, to see how they regroup, if they can regroup, and if in fact there are other old style actors in the Peronist Party on a national basis that basically shunt them aside, and we move to a situation which we haven't had in Argentina for literally decades, where we potentially have an opposition leadership that is more rational, that believes in fiscal coherence, and basically can allow for a less polarized, political situation. The FP, clearly is still alive. They're still dangerous, and they will try to regroup. But I think that is another, important read through. The other interesting conclusion, while we had anticipated the Provincias Unidas, which is this grouping of the governors, it's a bit of a polyglot between Peronist Governor Schiaretti, Jarjora, and Pularo. They did not run a fantastic election, even though they did score 6.96% of the votes. Is that they are not an overwhelming influence going forward. They do have 17 deputies and 5 Senate seats. So potentially this is a pool under which, Milei, through Santiago Caputo, through, some of the new players in the pro, which are in the lineup, is that they can reach out, to this group, which, has to reposition itself as we run up to the 26, 27, 2-year run to the election. Because if you stand in fierce opposition to a president that just won his second large mandate with over 40% of the votes, is that that's not a good marketing policy, and that Milei sent out olive branches to that group as well and said that he's willing to work with the governors. And I think that this is a clear signal that we're going to see a more collaborative tilt, for the government. But we have to remember that Milei feels victorious. He feels as though he's vindicated for a lot of the criticism and so forth. And whether that is really the true read through, or what in fact he won because there was an anti-Kirchnerista and fear factor, we have to see going forward. Now, I want to get our panelists involved here. First of all, Catalina, how do you guys see PBA after this election? Is that the political landscape has changed? Clearly, your predictions about how the mayors were not willing to back a Juan Grabois, is that there was a separation of fissures. So how are you guys seeing this? And if you want to do it in Spanish, I can translate, or however you'd like to do it.
Okay, I will try in English. I will try to do my best. Well, thanks, Walter. Yes, there are many signs, like you were saying, to watch these upcoming days. But the issue of the mayors was very important for us, like we were talking these last weeks. Now we call it the rebellion of the mayors, because the lack of support from the Peronist mayors became clearly evident, especially in the greater Buenos Aires. No, the mayors did not engage. They didn't take people to vote. They didn't support the campaign, the national campaign, and this was very clear. There are districts where they won comfortably last election, and now Libertad Avanza won, no? So this is a very important fact to watch, especially because maybe it could mean like a new political power. Now, that's why we call it like a rebellion of the mayors, because they show Cristina that they can win without her, like they did in the last election of September, and they show her too that Cristina needs mayors, because without the mayors playing, she lose the election. No, so that is a very important issue to watch, not only these weeks, if not the next 2 years. No, because they can like take strength from this, and maybe a new political power can emerge from this situation. So that was a very important fact.
Javier, given that you've worked very closely with some of the pro individuals, which were very played a protagonist role in winning this election, particularly Diego Santilli, clearly, Cristian Rotondo and Santilli, Guillermo Montenegro, maybe among the few handful of people that get a tap on the shoulder from the president to really play a role. Is that, while I think, you said to us that the game really is, Milei feels vindicated, this is his victory, is that there is some need for better political coordination and so forth. How are you seeing the potential collaboration or coalition with the former PRO or Juntos por el Cambio? And I know you've worked with Congress in the past, so how are you seeing that political coordination? Because one of the ways to capitalize on this election is to, first get a budget done and then fast track what many believe will be the first reform, which will be labor reform. So how do you see that dynamic playing out?
First, thank you for the invitation. I think it's going to be challenging on two sides. One, Mauricio Macri did not play a very prominent role in this campaign. He actually did a couple of posts where he was very clear, only supporting the candidates from his own party, not the whole list. That's something that after this victory, probably Santiago Caputo and Javier Milei will try and make him responsible for that and pay a bit of that price. Then Martin Menem and Catalina Milei come vindicated out of this election. So any idea of changing the Speaker of the House is going to be a bit more complex. There were Christian Ritondo has been trying to become Speaker of the House for a couple of years now, also in our administration. But I don't see a path right now. I think to prevent further disruption inside the presidential coalition and the presidential government, they're going to keep Martin Menem in the speaker role. So what I think they're going to try to do is try to fuse both parties in either one block or what's called interloque, which is like a block made out of two different parties that keep their own identity and their own presidents, but it's like a huge bigger block that has its own speaker on top. That happened with Juntos por el Cambio. Mario Negri used to be the speaker of the whole Juntos por el Cambio block, and the PRO had his own block inside that, like a smaller block, with his own speaker. I think some kind of dynamic in there, it's probably gonna work. Libertad Avanza has had a challenge managing a very small number of deputies and senators. They've lost, as time went by, both senators and members of the Chamber of Deputies. So managing a bigger block is going to be a bigger challenge, and they don't have people that know how to do that. Christian Ritondo might be the answer to that question. The problem here is like even inside the members of Congress that respond to PRO or align with PRO, most of them don't align necessarily to Mauricio Macri. 6 of them respond to Patricia Bullrich. 1 of them responds to Horacio Rodríguez Larreta. 1 of them responds to the governor of Entre Rios. So even Macri does not have a total control of his own bloc. So this is going to be a bit more difficult. What I do think is governors are going to try and get as much as they can when it comes with either money or public works. So any discussion with the budget, any discussion with further reforms would have to do a bit on the context and on what is implied inside each article of the law, but also what the government could give us for us governors. You need to remember that most governors, if not all of the governors, can run for re-election. The reason Provincias Unidas decided to run with Schiaretti and Randazzo is most of them have re-election. Santa Fe just did an election to change its constitution, the province constitution, so that the governor can run again. So most of them know that they have a very good chance of being reelected. So they're going to try and do a pork barreling, tit for tat negotiation with the government. And also the government needs more members of Congress and senators than the ones that he can coalesce just with a PRO party. So it's like 2 different negotiations in 2 different levels. One is with Mauricio Macri. How much do I need to give him to keep him inside? But I don't want to give him too much because he did not behave very well with us. And on the other side, what can we do with each of the different governors? One small comment on the reform of the labor reform. The problem with labor reform might not be passing it through Congress. It might be what happens in the judiciary system. The labor judiciary system responds to a very old union way of seeing this process. Already the reforms that were passed through in the ley bases had been stopped by the legal framework. So I'm not sure that the challenge for that reform is only going to happen in Congress.
One of the most symbolic things that Milei said last night in his interview with Luis Majul, and I'd like to get your take on this, Catalina, and also yours, Javier, is that when he was offered a chance to elevate or glorify his sister's role in the political coordination, he backpedaled and said, no, she did a great job, but she's part of a team. And, clearly there are expectations, and it's not been confirmed yet, that Santiago Caputo could be ascended to either a new role that is created in coordination, or maybe, he becomes the chief of staff and they find a new job for Guillermo Francos. But, first Catalina and then Javier, what did you think about that messaging? Because it sort of breaks with his, historical characterization that Karina is the jefe and so forth. And most of the political people we talked to believe that despite the great outcome at the end of the rainbow, is that she made, significant errors along the way. Catalina, what did you think about that messaging, and how do you see, I know you guys have relationship with Santiago Caputo's team. How do you see his role changing and shifting in this next chapter?
Walter, sorry, do you let me to add something to the pro fact,
Sure,
and then we
sure.
pass to this? So because we were analyzing this thing about the impact of the alliance between pro and Libertad Avanza, and we can see a path where they can reach a model of political cooperation. We see the German style agreement. I don't know if you know about it, but in the government of Baviera and the Merkel party have like a pact, an agreement that when there are elections in Baviera, Merkel support that candidate or that that campaign, that candidate, no? So she doesn't put any candidate of her own. And when she had elections and she had to put candidates outside Baviera in the rest of the country, the Javier government, that is a Christian Social Union, support that candidate. So we think that for Macri, it's better to cuidarnos,
to take care.
To take care of Ciudad de Buenos Aires, Chubut, Entre Ríos, and some districts of Buenos Aires province than to have maybe a minister, like a transport minister, okay? We think that they can find a path there to cooperate politically and to reach like a good understanding between them. So that's a comment about
that was an
pro
important point. Thank you, Catalina.
Well, on the other hand, yes, we think that it's very important, like the most important thing we see for this time is
I've got a bike there.
that how the government interprets this victory. And in that point, the Karina role is very important because in the first hand, they had to understand that they didn't want because the people support them directly, if not because in front of them they have the Cristina and the Kirchnerism. So that is a very important point that they have to understand and to interpret about this election. It's not about Karina's work. They won despite, he said, like a pesar de Karina, no? So now they need to cooperate, to understand with the governors, with Macri, with the United States. That is a very important fact too. And we think that there are not many people in the cabinet prepared for that role. Santiago Caputo is one of them. Is one of the ones we think that have the capacity to take this role. That is very, very important. Also, we think that they have an opportunity. We are always talking about the opportunities that this government had. They didn't show to have the ability to aprovecharlas.
To take advantage of it.
To take advantage of them. And they, with the figure like Santiago Caputo, they can find, like we are saying, like a path, like an understanding. But they should. We always think that Karina has a very important role. That is like emotional support for the president, and it's very, very important. But she doesn't have to manage the political. Have a political role, no?
I think you're pointing to an important subplot, Catalina, which is, Donald Trump loves a winner, and he loves nothing more than having a contribution and making a winner. And we've been thinking a lot lately about, the geopolitical overlay of the Trump and Besson engagement, and clearly having backed Milei and him being victorious for reasons that may not be due to his virtues, maybe have a lot more to do with the fear factor of Kirchnerism, is that, I think the expectation is that this could, very much deepen and widen the engagement between the United States and Argentina. And some of the people that may be picked for high profile slots, like Santiago, Pablo Quirno, and so forth, are individuals that have a good dialogue, that have experience in dealing with the CPAC and Republican Party strain. And I think that, this argues for Santiago Caputo to taking on a greater role. Javier, have you got any thoughts on that?
I think I agree with most of what Catalina just said. I think they're going to find a role for Santiago Caputo. I think the chief of staff is not going to be that role, because if they want to keep the peace, they need to try and get none of the both sectors to feel that they want too much. So they have to make a very balanced kind of reshuffling of the government. And I think that is going to be a bit of a challenge. Guillermo Francos is also another person that has had good coordination and dialogue with both governors and members of Congress. The thing here, and I'm going to be very candid, is like they used to have very good relationships and very good dialogue, but the problem is the government never came through with what they talked about. When you talk to governors and to members of Congress, the thing is like they never end up sticking their side of the bargain. So it's not that we don't have a good dialogue. It's that every time I make a deal with you, you don't stick up with the part that is responsible. I mean, I pay my dues with the boat, and you don't do what we talked about. There's this very Argentine Latin American kind of thing. A couple of weeks ago, the governor of Salta went with a band to the door of the Pink House, and he was like playing some kind of Salteñan music, because they weren't paying for, they weren't giving him some money. So both Francos and Santiago Caputo, both of them came down from the Pink House and received him and told him that don't worry, we'll give you what you need. But that kind of performance is not something that should happen if you want a workable relationship with the rest of the governors. Going back to the United States thing, Donald Trump loves a winner. There's a geopolitical conundrum there that it's Argentina, main markets are China and Brazil. So there's a bit of a strain there. We'll see how Pablo Quirno manages that. I do think both in the Justice Ministry, Security and Defense, their ministers are abandoning their posts because one just quit. The other one is Patricia Bullrich, she's becoming senator, and the other one is Petri, he's becoming a representative. Who they choose for those slots, it's going to be important. I think defense and justice might be easier to pick someone from either Guillermo Montenegro or somebody from the provinces or something like that. I think given the good election given by Patricia Bullrich, she might have a chance of trying to put her own kind of replacement. But I do think that and any other reshuffling should try to signal a willingness to open a bit the cabinet. The thing is, the president needs to make an equilibrium between Santiago Caputo and his sister. That conflict, even though it's going to probably reduce its intensity, is going to still be there. They manage different sectors of the government. They have different interests. So that is still going to be a latent problem.
Well, good. Well, I think as many of the listeners who've dialed into this call, is that we're spending a disproportionate amount of time on political coordination because, our sense is, and I think this comes from Catalina and Javier and our own team, is that political coordination was really, the massive failure that got them into the pickle that they were in terms of the run on the currency and so forth. So, irrespective of some of the other major themes that, certainly we're going to be writing about in the coming weeks, is that, what are they going to do with the FX regime? Can they continue to live under Toto Caputo's, bubble that a strong currency is the right way to go? We'll have to see if what the crypto markets we're anticipating today plays out over a longer period of time. And what the United States truly believes about the FX regime going forward, even though Scott Besson has booked a very, handy profit once the ARS opens up and the central bank will have won a bit of the battle with the Rofex guys. So, you know, we do think that there are a lot of other important themes. Is that now, if you took the mark to market on the short end of the curve, you've got the 29s and the 30s sort of piercing that key 10% level. What's the pathway to market access? Is there going to be a mega buyback of the short end of the curve with the help of the banks and the 20 billion additional that Scott Besson continues to refer? I think all of those key themes are going to come through, but some of the topics that Catalina and Javier are talking about, we want to be very clear is that they have an enormous opportunity, but implementation on the political side has not been their forte, and that Malay, rightly so, and the people around him in his inner circle are feeling vindicated, they're feeling chuffed up, and that is potentially a dangerous, sense of arrogance that we don't want to see filtering back in. Is that, the sense that we get from our contacts is that Besant and Trump have been insistent on them building consensus, reaching out to the governors. The IMF staff has also been, pounding the table on this. But we wanted to take this call and put a different spin on, than bond prices, than on, buybacks and liability management, and really focus in on, what is going to happen, going forward. And I think that Javier and Catalina are showing a good amount of optimism, but also a significant amount of circumspection that there needs to be a material improvement in the coordination of the government. You guys got anything else? And otherwise we can close out.
No,
Well, thanks for everybody. Go ahead, Catalina.
no, it's okay. It's very clear.
And once again, I want to thank both of you for joining to put a little bit of a different spin on this election. We're extremely grateful to Joaquin de la Torre and Catalina for giving us a heads up on the complex world of PBA and the mayors, which was a real benefit. And we'll continue to feed information from these guys and other sources to try and put a little bit more transparency on what's going to be happening going forward. But I think there's going to be, like always in Argentina, a lot of important news. There may be ministerial nominations. There may be progress in terms of coordination with Provincias Unidas and the governors. And we are going to be watching very closely, is there a rebirth of Peronism and how they regroup? And I think Catalina and Joaquin have been pretty clear that that's going to take a while, that it's not going to happen overnight, and that certainly benefits the government as they come out of today. But thanks again, everybody, for taking the time, and we'll be looking forward to speaking with you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walter and Javier.